the Brewmaster of Soulstorm Brewery from Oddworld Soulstorm, so naturally major spoilers for that game if you haven't played it, is quite a bit different from his counterpart in Oddworld Abe's Exoddus. Playing an arguably bigger role in Soulstorm, the Brewmaster, I would say, serves as the main antagonist, the big villain you have to face in the game, to a point he even appears looming on a screen as you battle his defences in the final area of the game. And to clarify, I say I consider him as the main villain of Oddworld Soulstorm, but some may argue, well, what about Moloch? To which I would say Moloch is the main villain for like the first few levels, but after that he and the pilot Slig just kind of take on this R2-D2 C-3PO sort of role, where they're really just basically watching what's going on and commenting on it. Not to mention, the game's called Oddworld Soulstorm, and in this game the Brewmaster is the Glukkon that's the sole head of Soulstorm Brewery, a business that he started by inventing Soulstorm Brew and performing experiments in order to perfect its formula, ensuring it's designed to best serve the facilities of the Magog cartel. After performing intensive tests in which many Mudokons were harmed to perfect the formula, he marketed his product, which is seen in the game via the tape that he recorded decades earlier, containing a presentation of him trying to get funding for his business from investors. The presentation was successful and Soulstorm Brew became a staple of Glukkon facilities due to how well it served them. In contrast to the Soulstorm Brew of Abe's Exoddus, which was alcoholic and designed to get Mudokons addicted, so the Glukkons had something to provide them in exchange for their labour. In Oddworld Soulstorm, the brew is an energy drink that's twice a day given to Mudokons working in the Glukkons' factories to keep them as highly productive as they can. But of course, perhaps the most important aspect of the brew is yet again its addictive qualities. However, this time it has far more deadly results. If a Mudokon doesn't get their brew, they will begin to experience withdrawal symptoms that make them severely ill, and within a few hours they will be dead, thus preventing any Mudokon escapees from reaching civilization. The fact that this was specifically designed by the Brewmaster to act this way shows how sinister this character is. I would argue he's perhaps the most evil Glukkon seen in the entire franchise, shown further by the way he speaks of the Mudokons and seems to exhibit blatant disregard, maybe even outright hatred arguably, for their species. This is in stark contrast to the Exoddus Brewmaster, who's kind of a comic relief character in some ways, and as a French stereotype just cares about making the brew the best tasting brew it can be for seemingly no particular reason. Even though its purpose in the grand scheme is malicious, that Brewmaster doesn't really seem to care, he's just obsessed with making the drink taste good. Meanwhile, Soulstorm's Brewmaster is more of a scientist as opposed to a brewer. And in that respect he reminds me very much of the Vikers, who he clearly works very closely with his excessive testing on an industrial scale to perfect the formula to see how far he can push Mudokons to work without them dying. It's also interesting that he mentioned that the brew gets chemically produced loyalty from the Mudokons, which suggests to me that among its other qualities, it also has some kind of, not sure what you'd call it, but like those drugs that affect the brain, like truth serum or that kind of thing, but you know, designed to encourage unquestioning loyalty. However, perhaps what makes the Brewmaster so successful is that aside from this kind of Viker-like scientific intelligence, he clearly also displays the natural business instinct that the Glukkons are known for. It has been said that the brew became such an important product for all Glukkon business owners that the Brewmaster went from a cunning scientist to become a powerful executive in his own right. Having spearheaded a product that is contracted to hundreds of other companies within the Magog cartel, he serves them in a now vital and bankable capacity. It reminds me of that saying that the actual people that became rich during the gold rush weren't the ones looking for gold, but the entrepreneurs that sold them the tools to look for gold. But imagine there was only one person providing those tools. Plus consider the fact that once the Mudokons are addicted to the brew, they have to have it or they die. Which means once a company has contracted the brew from the Brewmaster, they have to keep buying it. And if they want to stop using it, all their workers would be deceased within hours and they'd have to completely replace their labour force. So although they benefit from it, when you think about it, even the companies are trapped into being supplied with the brew. which means the Brewmaster is in a very lucrative and powerful position where he could keep raising the prices of it, and there's not much the other Glukkons that buy it from him could do about that. I would argue he's maybe the most successful Glukkon we've ever encountered, and it's therefore no wonder that in Magog society the Brewmaster became a very big deal, which is shown further by the newspapers in the endings of Oddworld Soulstorm. It's revealed that he was rewarded by the Queen, Glukkon Lady Margaret, with the highly acclaimed Immaculate Deception's Financial Medal of Honour, due to how well his brew directly resulted in increased production and manufacturing output. He was clearly very revered, and I think it might be suggestive of how important the position he held in Magog society was that he's referred to in the newspapers as simply the Brewmaster. No name, just simply known by his title, by what he does. I guess it's kind of like saying the Queen or the Emperor. He's the Brewmaster. Almost like it elevated him to a singular position in his own right that only he holds, just because that's how vital what he did and what he does is to their society. When writing this video, I briefly considered that maybe the Brewmaster simply hired Vika scientists to make the brew for him, but actually it's very evident that he truly is incredibly smart and scientific in his own right, and almost certainly created it mainly by himself. His office is incredibly practical in a way that perhaps most other Glukkons aren't so much, and actively looks like a space where he works and thinks. There's blueprints of the giant mixing machine seen on his desk, as well as tons of books, which who knows how he turns a page. Computer screens are also all over the place. He's got so many monitors. A setup like that seems like it'd cost a lot, especially considering it looks like it's from Razer. But I guess he's got more than enough moolah to afford it. Not to mention, the Brewmaster intensely studies a chalkboard during his scenes. Again, how does he draw on it, who the heck knows, but somehow the chalkboard has some really weird detailed markings on it. Now that could be the formula for the brew. Although it doesn't look like a formula to me, not that I'd know what a formula would look like anyway though. But on first glance it did remind me of occultist symbols, and indeed when I looked up occultism in Google Images, there were so many that are pretty much near enough the same as what appear on the chalkboard. And the thing that I find interesting about this is in my previous Brewmaster video, when analysing the Oddworld Soulstorm Brewmaster's appearance from his promo image before the game came out, I said his look kind of reminded me of Heinrich Himmler. Which is interesting because in real life, Himmler was also supposedly really into occultism and this kind of, I don't know if you'd call it dark magic, but whatever this kind of thing is, these kinds of symbols and all that. So it makes me wonder again if that was an inspiration. And I later read in the Oddworld Soulstorm The Art of a Video Game book, its description of the Brewmaster as a key member of the Royal Society of Alchemic Science. He is obsessed with alchemy and other more occult pursuits. And I like this because although it's not really been shown directly in the games that much, Lorne Lanning has previously spoken about how behind the scenes the Glukkons are very much into occultism and dark magic or whatever, which is apparently inspired by, according to Lorne, if I recall correctly, many powerful people in real life in private being very much into this kind of thing as well, even in modern times, like businessmen and all that for example. Interestingly, the original promo image of the Brewmaster differs greatly to how he's dressed in the final game, aside from the image appearing on the newspapers. Instead of wearing a dapper suit like in the picture, he actually wears a very militaristic tunic type of thing that kind of looks like a cross between a leather army trench coat and the chef's inspired outfit that the Exoddus Brewmaster wore. He's still got the pocket watch though, which is quite a nice connection between the two iterations of the character. According to the book, the Glukkons of Soulstorm were inspired by World War II German designs, and the Brewmaster's outfit seems quite prominent in this respect. That comparison was literally my first thought when I saw his outfit for the first time in a promo clip. One thing that is easy to miss about Soulstorm's Brewmaster though, is that he only has a single front tooth. This was done in order to subconsciously make him grotesque and creepy to the player. It's interesting that Oddworld Inhabitants were purposefully making the effort to have the Brewmaster to seem like a really horrific character, which makes sense considering his role in the game. He isn't seen until midway through Oddworld Soulstorm, but he quickly establishes himself as a far more insidious threat on an industrial scale, compared to the on-the-run Moloch in his blimp, who had been the main antagonist up to that point. Once Abe discovers the truth about Soulstorm Brew, he goes on a journey to the brewery with the intention of tainting the ingredients with the antidote for the fatal and addictive qualities of the drink. Causing mayhem along the way and providing sick Glukkons with the cure, pressure mounts on the Brewmaster as suddenly workers are going missing from factories and uprisings begin, something that the brew was designed to ensure never happens. This causes two camps of Glukkon opinion to form. The more, in my opinion, open-minded of their kind consider the possibility that the brew is no longer working. Moloch believes this to be the case. That's not surprising considering he is personally affected by this and has seen what the Glukkons are doing. But what's more interesting is the head of Necromines, Morgar, likewise considers this possibility, and despite being quickly reminded what a ridiculous idea it is to question the reliability of the brew, seems to be very swift in his criticism of the Brewmaster. And judging by how quickly the Glukkons turn on and question the Brewmaster, it makes me think they truly have been very reliant on the brew for keeping the Glukkons in check for so long, and thus the idea of it failing really sends them into panic, demanding answers from the Glukkon responsible. However, the arrogant Glukkons believe Moloch must have burned down his own farm to claim the insurance, and is now starting the uprisings to cover his tracks. The Brewmaster falls into this assumption, but he is the one responsible for the brew, which, as far as he's concerned, should work as it has done for decades. So that explains why he thinks that. But other Glukkons, such as Aslik of Vico Depot, think this way mainly due to the arrogant belief that Glukkons could never rise up against the Glukkons and beat them. And why would a Glukkon product like the brew suddenly start failing? Ironically, neither of these opinions were entirely correct, but either way, although the Brewmaster goes with the more arrogant belief, it's less out of the same kind of ignorance that Aslik displays, and more out of genuine intelligence, and simply him not having the right knowledge at the time. He clearly studies and ponders what could be happening, and although proclaiming vehemently that his brew is not failing to someone on the phone, privately considers the possibility once he hangs up on them. He displays a very sharp and arrogant attitude, one of superiority outwardly, because that's what he has to do to maintain control as a powerful executive. But in reality, he is apparently intelligent enough to consider all possibilities and intensely study what he feels he needs to know about in a given situation. In fact, if you look at his desk, you can even see a picture of what I initially thought was the concept art image of Lady Margaret's blimp, but actually looking at it, it doesn't quite match. But I think it's actually Moloch's blimp, which suggests that he's actively studying Moloch, if that is what it is. And he comes to the conclusion of this situation being Moloch's fault. But although he's wrong, it's probably the most intelligent interpretation he could make with the knowledge at his disposal. And he manages to very quickly convince doubting Glukkons of this opinion, showing that even when under pressure, he's still so important and respected that his words still hold a lot of persuasion power. And also a nice touch that I like is that you can even see how worried and scared his doubters look just before they step into his office, even though they're the ones that have come to confront him. I think it's just a nice subtle thing that shows how intimidating and powerful he is. He truly is a big figure in Glukkon society. Unfortunately for him and the other Glukkons in that room, however, no matter how powerful they are in society, they're still no match for traitorous sligs with guns, and consequently get assassinated when Moloch bribes their sligs into shooting them after he overhears the Brewmaster plotting against him. And actually the Brewmaster is twice as unfortunate, as he also ends up getting killed in the bad ending of the game too, along with Morgar and Aslik, when the brewery gets blown up accidentally. I found it quite ironic the way the brewery gets blown up in the bad ending of Oddworld Soulstorm and survives the good ending, but gets blown up in the good ending of Abe's Exoddus but survives the bad ending. Completely reversed. For of course, in Oddworld Soulstorm's case, due to the differences in the brew, it's bad for the factory to be destroyed without distributing the cure, because then all the Glukkon workers throughout the continent that are relying on the drink won't get it and will die. Considering the game is called Oddworld Soulstorm, it makes perfect sense that the Brewmaster of Soulstorm Brewery is the main threat and target that needs to be taken down, due to how much of a linchpin his efforts have been in keeping the Glukkons a subjugated race. He is the face of evil and oppression, and his death is the first necessary step in liberating the Glukkons from their set of shackles. Until he and his brew are vanquished, the Glukkons can't rise up against their masters. Quite a contrast from the far more comical figure of his Abe's Exoddus equivalent. Speaking of which, gone is the stereotypical French accent, instead replaced with a voice that I'm not even sure what it is.
This makes no sense. My brew has always worked. There must be some other...
Sounds maybe a bit like a slight German accent to me, but I'm not sure. So I'm generally curious if any of you know how to describe his accent, and if I'm just missing an obvious word for the way he speaks. Either way, the Brewmaster of Oddworld Soulstorm is clearly a very different and brand new reinvention of the Glukkon, designed to be one of the most evil and sinister characters encountered in the Oddworld franchise.
Hello, follow me.